Good afternoon, everyone. So there's some meat. There's some meat on the CPC bones. Michelle Rempel held a press conference this morning at 11:30, and it took till now to watch it and whatever. But I'm going to show you the important parts and some of the question and answer at the end. She makes some news. I'm cautiously optimistic. I like hearing policy. I like having something to actually debate. So at least we've got a direction and some context when the Conservatives are asking questions in question period. We're going to do it this way. And I mean, Michelle Rempel seems to like data. So if they're going to do it a specific way, she generally has data to back up the reason why. And she talks about that in her remarks. I'm going to show you all of her remarks. There's an English and a French. There's a preamble. The preamble's like 8 minutes. So she's talking about setup and setup and setup. At 9 minutes or about 8:50, she says, and if you look in the description, I've time indexed all the stuff that I'm talking about. So if you want to have a look at, maybe something that was said or what my notes were, have a look in the description. Link to the original video is there as well. You should go watch the preamble, the 8 minutes. I mean, it's not a preamble. That's her statement, right? It's like, where are we? And this is the reason why. But it's interesting. At 9 minutes, she starts talking about the government's plan. So at this time signature here, 8:28, she's kind of wrapping up, and this is the conclusion of her opening statements before she gets to what the Conservative Party's plan is. I think this is important. This is good to inform debate. I want to have a knockdown, drag-out, great debate about these issues. I don't want mousy half measures like Trudeau's been proposing and actually following through with for the last 3 years. I want to actually solve the problem, right? Here's the problem. And I mean, the first step in solving a problem is identifying that you have a problem, right? Here's the problem we need to solve. Okay, great. We can all agree this is the problem. We're at the identifying the problem phase, right? And Michelle has rightly said, well, the population, the populace has said, this is an election issue. This is an issue. So if the population says that, then you have to respond. And she says almost this verbatim, like, that's why I'm here today with this meat. So Michelle, thank you. I appreciate the meat. I appreciate giving us stuff to talk about in Canada that is not just speculation and looking at words and turns of phrases and really, like, I'm glad for the clarification. And Michelle Rempel clarifies a lot and clarifies the CPC position in, like I said at the beginning of the video, a way that makes me a little more optimistic about Canada's future. I'm going to knock some wood, and let's start.
In short, these levels are not credible and do nothing to reverse the trend of Canadians' decreased appetites for increased immigration levels. Trudeau cannot say that his immigration levels are helping the world's most vulnerable, because they are not. He cannot say that his levels are helping to bolster the economy, because he has no data to show for it. Justin Trudeau has no credibility to set Canada's immigration levels. So what would a Conservative government do differently, and what levels would we set? At the end of August, I stood in this very room and outlined some of the key changes an Andrew Scheer government would make to Canada's immigration system. To recap, our approach to setting immigration levels would first recognize that how we allow people to enter the country and who we allow to do so matters. Justin Trudeau has failed to recognize this principle. We would end the practice of setting immigration levels like an auction for votes or for a seat on the UN Security Council. We would immediately seek to decrease the number of people entering Canada illegally via upstate New York and subsequently claiming asylum. We would do so by seeking to close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement and significantly expedite the processing and removal of those who Trudeau has allowed in. The lengthy process between entering Canada illegally and being removed, all while being able to access social welfare programs, is an incentive for this behavior that must be ended. It is not acceptable that Trudeau has planned on this being a permanent situation.
Okay, and I'm going to stop right there because that's already a lot of news to take in. So she wants to end the practice of setting immigration levels as a means to a seat on the UN Security Council. Savage. She wants to decrease the number of people entering Canada illegally, and she says a couple of times with further questions, and I'll show them later as we get there. But she says zero. Like there should be none. There should be no illegal entry into Canada. So I'm glad, yay, somebody in government sitting in official opposition other than Maxime Bernier is saying, no, we shouldn't have this. This is insanity. Good. Thank you. The official position of the CPC is it should be zero. They want to close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Act. And she actually addresses why she thinks the CPC can close the loophole where the Liberal government has failed. She wants to significantly expedite the processing and removal of those Trudeau has let in, but she hasn't got there yet. So let's continue listening. I just wanted to make sure and highlight those points because, one, I think, being savage like that at the beginning, like talking about the UN Security Council seat, you have to point that stuff out. You've got to hit them, right? Like, and that's the debate equivalent of a jab, right? Like you're like, bam, gotcha, buddy, because everybody knows it, and now somebody quote official, has said it, right? And so that's good. It's like, well, I won't give comparisons. I think I fleshed it out there.
We would also establish a set of metrics to determine what Canada's immigration levels should be based on transparent principles with integration and self-sufficiency at the forefront. For Canadians to see immigration as a positive thing, they should be able to easily see the employment and social welfare statistics for immigration levels for any given year and stream.
Okay, sorry, I actually missed a couple of things and I want to talk about that too. So she did talk about significantly expedite the processing and removal of those Trudeau's let in. So I'm glad she spoke to that. We need to get the people who are here illegally and who do not qualify out. She said the time between entering and removal is an incentive that needs to be removed. So she's talking about the downtime between somebody who doesn't belong in Canada and us putting them up in hotels while they wait to be processed. And Justin Trudeau hasn't processed many at all. So, and the speculation is that he's going to use the time between now and the 2019 election to start speeding up the process. So it looks like he's going to do something so he can get in for 4 more years. That's I believe that's Spencer Fernando's speculation, but that's not mine. I'm just letting you know. So I find that interesting. And I'm glad that she's talking about removing the incentive, because if you have a hotel room and money coming in and no real timeline, it'll be next month or next year, whatever, then yeah, I mean, that's an incentive to just sit around in the hotel provided to you. They want to establish metrics to determine what our immigration levels should be based on transparent principles with integration and self-sufficiency at the forefront. Like that's up there with Maxime Bernier's tenets for the People's Party, mutual respect, respect for the law, et cetera, et cetera. I like it. And I'm not sad to say I like it. Like I said, I want 2 strong parties. I want 3 strong parties. I want people to be able to hash out the differences and come to a reasonable agreement that everybody's happy with, right? I don't want this weak party that Justin Trudeau is currently leading Canada off a cliff, right? That's terrible. It's not good for Canada. It's better for Canada when we have great ideas that are fighting for the limelight instead of an awful idea and a mediocre idea, right? Like, it's better to let's have shining, bright debates and interesting ideas and not half-ass it, right? Like, man, we could be so great, right? We could continue to be so great.
We would also establish a transparent system for consulting with industry and the provinces to set immigration levels. We would focus on setting humanitarian immigration levels that focus on higher utilization of the privately sponsored refugee program, where individual Canadians, through their own funds, not taxpayer funds, support the entry of refugees, and would restrict the utilization of government-assisted refugee programs to instances of the 4 atrocity crimes. We would end the practice of allowing the United Nations to be the sole agency for selecting humanitarian immigrants to be resettled to Canada, and we would not cede our sovereign right in setting immigration levels to this agency. We would transform the temporary foreign worker
Okay, so that's a lot of news there, and I didn't mean to stop it in between of her making the announcement about the UN, but that's big news. Those are all big, big things, and I'm glad they're speaking about them publicly. So they're going to end the practice of allowing the UN to be the sole agency selecting humanitarian immigrants to come to Canada. So that's not the only agency they'll ask. I guess they'll still ask them, but they'll ask some other agencies too. I don't know. It's not fleshed out, but still better than what's currently happening. And she said, we will not cede sovereignty to set immigration levels to the UN. But she doesn't specifically talk about the UN Compact on Migration, doesn't talk about any other UN commitments, but she's very clear that we won't cede our sovereignty. So she's also tabled a motion talking about studying the Compact on Migration based on other countries pulling out. So at least, again, the CPC is appearing to not be tone deaf. They're listening to people's concerns and they're speaking to it. So that's beneficial. They'll end the Okay, this is, well, back to temporary foreign workers.
Program and not shy away from difficult conversations around employment insurance, working conditions, and wage depression associated with the program, and other reasons why Canadians don't take or aren't skilled for certain jobs, and ensure that Canadians are first matched with available work. We would also change our immigration programs and support to better focus on economic immigration levels and retention to regions with acute labor shortages. It's not enough to cite this Conference Board of Canada and saying that the economy needs more immigrants. Immigration levels should be set to ensure that newcomers are matched with jobs in regions where Canadians are not out of work. In short, a Conservative government would not pull a number out of the air in terms of how many people we would allow into the country. The number we would present to Canadians would be shaped by the above principles and would be answered as follows. There are X number of job vacancies in a certain industry or region. Here's why Canadians aren't doing these jobs. Here's what we did to try and fix that problem. And as such, we are allowing X number of people to enter Canada with X skill set to fill this need. Then we would track our outcomes to make sure our programs are working and adjust as necessary. On the humanitarian side, we would not.
Okay, and I'm going to stop her there. So they wouldn't pull a number out of thin air, and there would be a process that's supposedly transparent. And she talks later in question, like when there's questions, talking about having being able to look up a cohort of immigrants and look up the statistics on how many have jobs percentage wise and how many are on social assistance and et cetera. Data, right? Trackable data saying, well, this was successful, this wasn't so successful, and here's how we're trying to fix it. So better than putting their heads in the sand and maybe, losing 50,000 citizens or refugees that we've brought to Canada, and they're gone, they're in the wind. So much better than that, much better, much better. So good job, Michelle. Again, thank you.
Not allow people to enter Canada illegally and abuse our asylum system. The target number for that stream of entry should be 0. All other targets would be met by gaining consensus from Canadians that we should help a certain cohort of people, for example, genocide survivors, and then gaining consensus from Canadians on how much money we should spend to support the initiative in terms of the cost of integrating into Canada and the context of putting the needs of Canadians first. We shouldn't take a false morally superior position that excludes Canadians from helping to decide how our humanitarian immigration system should function and be funded. The levels Justin Trudeau has put forward in this report are unfocused, unplanned, and ill thought out. There is no justification included herein on how he would change the system to make it more just, fair, or lawful. It is simply a continuation of his failed immigration policies. The reality is that Canada can't sustain high immigration levels under Justin Trudeau's failed immigration policies. A change in government must occur before Canadians will be able to regain faith in the integrity of our immigration system. For all the reasons I've given you today, the Conservative Party of Canada strongly opposes the levels set out in this report.
Okay, and then the next part is the French language, and then it's questions. And there's a couple of questions that I wanted to highlight, and we'll get to them, but I wanted to talk about a couple of things. She said very clearly, the no illegals allowed, 12 minutes in, her government will not support the, quote, stream of illegal immigrants coming through Roxham Road or through upstate New York, as she says. And she says, we're gonna work on that. So, and she answers questions about it right now. We'll get there. Hold on. Okay, so this is 29 minutes, 46 seconds in, and she's at the end of a question about collecting data on recent immigrants and tracking the cohorts. And she has detailed answers, so they're long, but I want to get to the meat of specific ones. So here she's talking about it's systems that disincentivize getting jobs for new refugees, because if they get a job, then their free money gets clawed back, right? Which makes kind of sense, but also obviously it disincentivizes them from getting a job. So here's Michelle.
Money into in terms of language acquisition, support. I've heard anecdotally that some of the support systems that are provided to refugees, for example, might actually disincent getting a job. For example, I met with Mushrooms Canada. It's an industry association of mushrooms growers across the country a few weeks ago, and they talked about how they wanted to run a pilot program of bringing some recently resettled refugees to work on their farms, and people were keen to do that. But some of the eligibility criteria around getting that license license or the allowance that somebody would get in the first year, that having a job would actually remove some of the ability for them to draw on that. So they chose to stay on social welfare versus getting a job. Those are that data that I'm talking about. It's necessary for us to track that and for us to understand whether or not our programs are actually incenting or disincenting people from integrating into the economy over time. And I think that that is a key component of where Canadians look to in terms of their social support or their social license for immigration writ large. I think I'll close with this. I'll say the reason why that data is so important too is because Canadians support immigration when people come to Canada and work to build the country economically, right? When they see over time that people are working hard, they're paying taxes, and these are many new Canadians, right? We have so many success stories. We're a nation of immigrants. Where Canadians have concern is when that fails. And I think that, we are exposed to a lot of the news coming out of Europe, where there's been, large waves of migrants over the last 3 years, a great strain placed on a lot of the social, very generous social welfare systems in those countries. And now that we've seen an increase at the U.S. border of people coming in illegally, claiming asylum, to Ms. Van Duzen's question, are these other, potential waves on our radar? They're on all Canadians' radar, and we have to get this right. Otherwise, I think there's no program that the Prime Minister can put in place in terms of propaganda to raise Canadians' appetite for immigration. It has to be solid policy, and it starts with smart economic data like that.
Okay, and the next question is talking about that, but I want to talk about what she said. I mean, she referenced the European migrant crisis in a way that is saying like it has to inform our conversation, which that's been kind of one of the cornerstones of what I've been talking about for months. It needs to inform the conversation, and I'm glad to hear Ms. Rempel talking about that in a real relatable way, not in a kind of a bureaucratic one or two steps back, like, oh, we need to help those people. No, she understands, or it seems that she's understanding that Canadians are fed up with this. The news is very clear about what's happening, and we're done. Similarly, she talked about the South American caravan. She didn't say the South American caravan, but she talked about, this happening on the southern border of the United States, and what's to stop them from coming here. And yeah, great question. What is to stop them from coming here? Not a whole lot. And so she's said and made a lot of news, for the Conservative government to name those things as influencing factors in their policy rollout is at least a step in the right direction. At least it's being talked about at this level, and it's being taken seriously because people are frustrated. I'm frustrated. And this is good. This is good to see. I'm going to continue. She talks about public opinion this is a question on public opinion on immigration. And the guy's, I think he's the one conflating things. I think Michelle does a good job managing him, and that's not easy for a politician. So I think he's the one conflating it, but we'll just listen and you make up your mind.
We'll go Glenn McGregor, then Michelle Zilio.
Hey, you referred to public opinion attitudes, research on attitudes towards immigration. I just wondering if you think it's responsible, or if your party bears any responsibility for essentially conflating what's happening at the borders, with migrants crossing the borders illegally or irregularly, which we prefer to call it, with immigration of economic and family class immigrants, because they're two separate things, and those people crossing the borders are not necessarily immigrants.
Yeah, I just asked for an instance on when we did that.
Well, you just done it right now. I mean, you've talked about people's attitudes towards migration,
right? But
immigration, and you're talking about the refugees who come here as refugees who may not be able to speak English or French,
but how do
and then comparing that to the larger question of the immigration targets.
Well, I don't think that I've done that in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I spoke specifically about family reunification within my remarks. The data that I cited at the front end of my remarks were actually commented on by a senior researcher within Angus Reid, where she heard.
So I'm just going to leave it there. I don't necessarily think that she did what he's accusing her of. However, I do think that the interviewer was getting at something that I'm frustrated with too. In the House of Commons, it's oftentimes the words are interchangeable, and it's frustrating as somebody who's trying to report to you guys about what they're saying when they use interchanging words like asylum seeker and refugee to describe illegal border crossers. And it's the Liberal government, in my opinion, that's been playing with the language, because they're the ones who are setting the press tone. They're the ones who are effectively trying to hijack the language to fit the narrative. And in doing that, these guys and me and the press are trying to keep up, but it gets confusing because you try and use one term and then they co-opt the term, or they come up with something that's similar, right? The irregular border crossing, right? Which you see and you replace, but there are people who see it and think, oh, the regular border crossing, isn't that nice? It's very insidious because it's playing to least common denominators, but it gets in there, right? Like it's like having the TV on in the background, or campaign signs up, right? You see those names, you're like, what's that green guy? I've seen the name before. It's in your brain. It gets in there. So it's very insidious the way they sneak that change in language, and it's not subtle either. Like it's a couple of days and boom, illegal has become irregular, and then you're un-Canadian if you ask Ahmed Hussein about it, or Hassan about it. It's insanity. I'm going to find the next clip. Hold on. This is probably the most important question and answer in the whole exchange. I think it's interesting. And I think she's probably right. Like, the more I think about it, I think she's probably exactly right. So, Michelle?
Michelle Zilio, Globe and Mail.
Hi. So last I heard from the U.S., they had not responded to the Liberal government's request to open the Safe Third Country Agreement and just get conversation going on it. Despite what that might entail, they hadn't even responded. So why do you think a Conservative government could convince the government to close the loophole?
Well, first, I think that any overtures that this Liberal government has made have probably been quite ineffectual. I don't think that the Canadian government right now has a particularly strong working relationship with the administration in the U.S. Writ large. And I also haven't heard any details, and if you have, I'd love to hear them on what the ask actually was. I think that there's a broader conversation to be had that would likely incent the Americans to engage with Canada. The reality is the global context has changed in terms of migration. I know that the American president had made a comment about a year ago, something to the effect of, we need to look at our northern border out of concerns for security. What does that mean in terms of a continental agreement on how we manage our borders? It is a question that this government should be asking. The other thing is, I can't imagine that the American government would be particularly thrilled that the Liberal government had to go to them and ask the Americans to manage their visa process for Nigerians, because we were seeing an uptick of people entering, basically flying to JFK and getting on a bus to Canada. That's an abuse of the American system. I can't see the Americans being particularly excited that their country is being used as a way station for people to come to Canada. And there's a broader conversation to be had in terms of labor force mobility that I don't think was adequately addressed under the revised NAFTA. So to me, I have heard nothing out of this government that immigration policy was even on the radar with the American administration over the last year. So why would we do better? Because we'd actually raise it with them. I would challenge this government to show what they've done, and my assumption that it's precious little.
Savage. And like I said, the more I think about it, she said it initially and I thought they must have asked. They probably didn't ask. They probably, between what? Trudeau stabbing Mr. Trump in the back on NAFTA, USMCA. When could he have, in really good faith, when could he have asked? So the end of the press conference is pretty good. You should probably, watch it if you're interested. She does a good little closing on the question, on the final question, saying Trudeau has his head in the sand, and it's quite good. It's very, rah, rah, rah. I'm glad that the CPC is putting meat on their policies. I'm glad they're not afraid to talk about some of the less comfortable aspects of the immigration policy, the temporary foreign workers being used in Atlantic provinces. That's not going to be popular in Atlantic provinces. It's not. So good for them. I'm glad that they're addressing it. At this point in time, we need to honestly address these issues, because they are issues and they won't go away by themselves. So thanks for watching. Links in the description, and still check out the peoplespartyofcanada.ca. good ideas in open debate can potentially become great ideas. But at the very least, if you have an open debate about it, the bad ideas can fall away, right? We can all agree that that's a bad idea. Okay, let's not do that and do something else, right? If we just silence everybody, well, you get Justin Trudeau. People's Party of Canada.ca. Thanks for watching, everybody.